just imagine everything that we know happened in the Meccan period. Abu Ubaidah went through it. He went through the famine, and he went through the boycott, and he went through, all of the other issues that the Muslims were going through. So we skip to Badr and we look at some portraits of his life when he was in Medina, and how he dealt with some of these things. So in the Battle of Badr, he faced some very difficult trials. One of them, while he was fighting in the battlefield, there was one enemy soldier who kept pursuing him and running after him to try to fight him. And he kept running away. He did not want to face this person. And the person kept on going after him, and he just kept on trying to avoid him, until one time the person finally caught up and blocked his path, and he could not get around this person. So he eventually started to fight this person, and because he was a very strong warrior, he ended up killing the person with one strike to the head, and the man was dead. Who was the man he was trying to avoid the whole time? It was his own father. It was his own father. So you can imagine how difficult it was, and it gives you a picture of how difficult the Battle of Badr was for the Muslims. It's not just the difficulty of a physical ordeal. It's not just that they're fighting and they're going to war and their own lives are on the line. It's their own family that they're fighting. That makes it, psychologically, that changes the war completely. Right? That's one of the most difficult things. And that's why some of the scholars, they say that the verse in the Quran which says that fighting has been prescribed for you, even though it's detestable to you, right? That كُتِبَ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ, right? So even though you dislike fighting, it's still been prescribed for you. That verse was revealed in the context of the Battle of Badr. Now, when you read it normally, you think, the Muslims didn't want to fight because fighting is detestable, because your own life is going to be on the line. You might die. Obviously, that's detestable. But some scholars went further and they said, not only was it detestable that you're going to be fighting, because Arabs were used to fighting, they were prepared for war. But what was the most detestable thing to them was that they're going to be fighting their own family members. And that makes it on a completely different level of difficulty. So this was the case in the Battle of Badr. He had to fight his own father, and he ended up killing his own father, because it was either him or his father, number one, and he tried to avoid him, and number two, his father would end up killing all his Muslim brothers and sisters on the battlefield. So that's why one of the verses relates to his context, where it says, "You will not find a people who believe in Allah in the last day having affection for those who oppose Allah and His Messenger, even if they were their fathers or their sons or their brothers or their kindred." So what does affection mean? It doesn't mean you can't love your father, you can't love your mother. It means that somebody who opposes Allah and His Messenger and is fighting against the Muslims, you don't show affection towards them against your own Muslim brothers and sisters, against Islam, so that Islam is going to have to suffer because of what they're doing. So when you have to choose between family and Islam, you choose Islam. And that's what Abu Ubaidah is showing. And it's a very, very difficult thing. It's something that people face on a daily basis. People who accept Islam, people who convert to Islam, as well as people who grew up in Muslim families. And there comes a time when their family tells them, you're being too Muslim. We're all Muslim, but you're being too Muslim by wearing the hijab, or you're being too Muslim by, waking up in the morning for Fajr or wanting to go to the masjid, or you're being too Muslim by, talking about, Muslims being oppressed in certain part of the land. Just be quiet. Just, go to the masjid on Friday, and that's sufficient for you. And you find a lot of people having to face their own families. Now, if you think about that, when you're facing your own family, you're still facing them in a much lesser circumstance than somebody like Abu Ubaidah is facing them. So when you look at a companion like this, the lesson that you should get is, my family's upset at me because I'm practicing Islam. My family's upset at me because I'm wearing hijab. or my family's upset at me because I'm being active in the Muslim Student Association and they don't want me to be so active because they're concerned or whatever it is. It comes back down to, you know what, I am going to have to make a decision. As long as I'm doing things with wisdom, I'm going to have to decide, do I give precedence to Allah and His Messenger, to Islam, or do I give precedence to the family? And these are good role models for us that show Islam takes precedence over everything. There's a sense of respect to your family. There's a way of, with wisdom, trying to explain to them and make sure you're not, doing things that you shouldn't be doing. But at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes precedence over everything. And that's the mentality of a believer. That's what happened to Abu Ubaidah in the Battle of Badr. Moving on after Badr, you find that one time a Christian delegation came to Medina to visit the Prophet, peace be upon him, from Najran. And Najran is an area in southern Arabia which was composed primarily of Christians. Right? And I think we've covered this before in history. So why they came to the Prophet was they had some property dispute among themselves. And they had heard about the reputation of the Muslims, and particularly about the Prophet, how he's a wise man and he's a just man. So what happens when you have a dispute among your own people and you cannot resolve it? You want a third party to get involved, but you want to make sure the third party is known for justice. So why would you have a third party? Because the third party seems like a neutral party. So both sides would be willing to agree to arbitration, and whatever they decide, they're going to go ahead and accept that judgment. So there's really no other option. So this shows you the reputation that the Muslims had during this time. That even a group of Christians coming from Najran are going and asking the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, that we want you to judge between this issue that we have. So they came to Medina, they talked to the Prophet, and the Prophet said he will send somebody on his behalf who's strong and trustworthy. Two characteristics. He has to be strong and he has to be trustworthy. Right? Now what story does that remind you of? Sayyidina Yusuf, right? So where was that when we had covered? What about you? What about Prophet Yusuf? Hey, I know it's in the Quran. What part of the story is it mentioning that he's strong and trustworthy? When he was given the task to rule the place?
When he was when he was released from the prison.
Yes.
And he was given the rule. He was assigned as a management or something like to distribute the food.
Yeah. Distributing the food and managing the food, right? So who said that he's trustworthy and strong? Exactly. He himself mentioned to the king that I'm strong and trustworthy, both. That's why you should appoint me to this position, because he was trying to show this position requires these two qualities. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying the exact same thing. I'm going to send you someone who's both strong and trustworthy. Meaning it's not sufficient to have one or the other. You can have a trustworthy person, a person who's very honest and just, but they're not strong. They have a very weak personality. They're not going to be able to judge between a dispute. And you can have someone who's very strong, but they're not fair, right? So that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, I'm going to send you someone with these characteristics. So what happened was, you find that he said, I'm gonna appoint the person very soon. Just give me some time. So what happened was, the Prophet ﷺ goes for prayer, and Umar is narrating this story, and he's saying, you know what? After the prayer was over, I started making sure I'm right behind the Prophet. I'm showing my face around, I'm the guy for the job. Pick me, right? Because if the Prophet said that I'm looking for someone who's strong and trustworthy, that's like a validation from the Prophet that this is the guy who has a good character. So Umar wanted to insist, I'm going to be that person. So he started showing himself, and the Prophet was looking around, looking for someone in particular. So he kept on going in the front. He's like, I'm right here. I'm right here. Maybe he didn't see me, I'm right here. I'm the guy. And actually, the Prophet was looking around for Abu Ubaidah. Right? He was looking for him, and he kept on searching until he found him. And he said, okay, Abu Ubaidah, you're the one who's going to be going. So it shows you something about his character. It shows you his character in the sight of the Messenger of Allah and in the sight of the community. And Prophet Musa as well, right? When he was drawing the water out from the well, right? So it's similar. So Abu Ubaida's status is very high because of what the Prophet ﷺ said about him. One time he had actually led an expedition of 300 soldiers going out near the Red Sea to pursue one of the caravans belonging to the Quraysh. So there were many expeditions going out because the Muslims and the Quraysh were in a state of war. So what happens is, in order to have a war, you have to fund that war. You need to have a strong economy. You need to have, the countries which have a stronger economy end up being able to buy more weapons, raise larger armies. So this was an economic aspect of this war that was going on between the Muslims and the Quraysh at this time. So in order to put a stop to that, just hold off on the question. In order to put a stop to that, you find that some expeditions were sent out in order to intercept the caravans. And it was happening to the Muslim caravans, it was happening to the Quraysh caravans. Because the primary means of income is foreign trade, especially in Mecca, because there's really not much that grows in Mecca or anything like that. So during one of these expeditions, Abu Ubaidah was there. He was leading this expedition, and they were running out of food. And they're traveling near the coast of the Red Sea, and they pretty much were almost out of food completely. So he began to ration the food, and it got so low that they actually got down to 1 date per day. So everybody gets 1 date for the entire day. That's all you're going to get. And, a very difficult circumstance, But a date at the same time, it actually, out of many fruits, it's packed with calories. It's packed with sugar. It gives you a lot of energy. So dates are actually very, very healthy for you. So you can survive maybe a few days off of something like this. So eventually all their food ran out. And when they had no food left, they even started eating leaves. Imagine how hungry a person is. But when you're eating leaves, you're going to choose leaves which are nice and soft, maybe crunchy, something like that, like normal leaves. But they couldn't find anything else, so they actually started eating thorny leaves from an acacia tree, which is known as khabat. So what happened is that army that was sent out, they became nicknamed Jaysh al-Khabat, meaning the army of the thorny leaves. So because no one wants to eat something that's thorny and prickly and all that, but they had nothing else. So they nicknamed the army this. And this is what used to happen sometimes. One time the Prophet ﷺ, he went out on an expedition, and they were walking barefoot because they had lost their shoes, and the terrain was very harsh. So their feet were bruised, some of their fingernails were falling off. It was really, really difficult. So in order to prevent their feet from bleeding even more, they took rags and they tied rags around their feet, and they started, kept on going. So they called this expedition Dhatul Riqa, which means the expedition of rags. So they nicknamed expeditions that they went out on based upon what happened over there at the time. So this shows you the difficult situation that they were in. But it just shows you what happened was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after all of their patience, He actually sent a whale for them. And whether it's miraculous or not miraculous, it's not important. A whale washed up on the shore, which is pretty rare, right? A giant fish, which is a whale, washed up on the shore, and they were talking about how large it was because they don't get to see whales very often. So this is huge. It's one of the huge whales. And they said that a camel could pass under the ribs of this whale. That's how large it was. So imagine, huge. So this was like a blessing for them. Imagine you could keep on eating a whale for a very, very long time. So they stored up all this food. They kept on surviving on this whale until they were heading back. So when they finally head back to Medina, they informed the Prophet ﷺ about the whole story, how they had run out of food and they were almost starving, and then this whale came and they washed up and they kept on eating the whale and everything. And this is not in your book, but this is the rest of the story. So the Prophet ﷺ, he asked them, he says, do you still have some of that whale left? And they said, yeah, we have a lot. There was so much. We've been kept on eating. We still have some. So he said, come on, bring me some. So he wanted to taste whale because he's never had whale in his life. He probably will never have whale again in his life. So he actually asked for some of it, and he ate some of the whale as well. So it shows you that if you're sometimes curious about what a type of food would taste like, there's nothing wrong with that. Getting a taste, once in your life. So this kind of shows you the status of Abu Ubaidah in that he was chosen to lead this expedition, and it was a very difficult expedition because they had run out of food. So this is another thing that he went through. During the Battle of Uhud, we're familiar with the Battle of Uhud from the previous class. When the battle was turning for the worst, the soldiers started encircling around the Prophet, peace be upon him, to protect him. All right, so this was a very dangerous situation. Abu Ubaidah was one of those people. And we saw how many companions actually fell during this time. They actually were killed during this time. So Abu Ubaidah was one of them, actually defending him, protecting him, making a shield around him, basically. After the battle was over, remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, the armor had pierced into his cheek. And he had two parts of the armor, either the chain link or whatever it is, inside his cheek, and he had been bashed in the head. So Abu Ubaidah came, and he decided the best way to remove these links, rather than just pulling and causing harm to the Prophet, is to actually come and use his teeth to pull them out. So he actually went up to his cheek, and he grabbed it, and he was pulling out the link, but it had gone so deep inside that when he pulled it out, he actually lost one of his incisor teeth. So he actually lost his tooth popped out. Now imagine, his tooth popped out, he's bleeding, he's in this circumstance, but he's not done. He wants to still serve the Messenger of Allah, so he goes and uses the other tooth, tried to pull out the link, and he pulled out the second link, but he lost his other tooth. So he lost both of his incisor teeth. He lost 2 teeth. Just think about that. And think about how that relates to what Umar said about Suhail ibn Amr. Remember? Let me pull out the 2 incisor teeth so that he's not able. This is Abu Ubaidah trying to not cause the Prophet ﷺ any type of pain. Says, I'm going to handle this myself. Because he knew, militarily, he knew the best way to heal this wound and to get it out is going to be with my own teeth, rather than using some kind of piece of metal or something like that. So this is the love that he had for the Messenger of Allah. Imagine, we talk about love for the Prophet. We talk about, we wish we could be with him, and we wish we could, be in that time or something like that. Look at the type of sacrifice that people used to go through. Right? And today we have similar challenges. When people mock the Prophet ﷺ, when people don't know about his life, when people think wrong things about him, we have a responsibility to stand up for his honor. We have a responsibility to do something. In the right way, of course, but we have a responsibility. How many of us are willing to, put that effort? It just takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of effort. It takes a little bit of reading. It takes a little bit of speaking to other people. This is what we can do. We're not going to ever have the opportunity to give up a tooth or give up this or be in the battlefield protecting the Prophet ﷺ. We don't have that. But we have other opportunities. That when we see somebody making fun of the Prophet, when we see somebody writing bad things about him, this is our opportunity to do exactly what, or actually less, but something comparable to what people like Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah did. Right? So keep this in mind, that we have a responsibility as well, and he's a great example for us. So Abu Ubaidah, he was given many different positions throughout his life. Among them, he was collecting the jizya, the poll tax, from the people of Bahrain. So it shows you his status. He was chosen to do that. When they were choosing the first Khalifa, after the Prophet, peace upon him, passed away, Umar was the first person. He came and he went to Abu Ubaidah first. So everyone knows the story about Abu Bakr, and we had talked a little bit about this. Everyone knows Abu Bakr was selected as the first Khalifa. But how did it happen? First, Umar went to Abu Ubaidah and he said, stretch out your hand. Give me your hand. I'm gonna declare my allegiance and pledge to you, make the bay'ah, which is known as the pledge, to say that you are the leader. Right? And why did he say that? He said, because the Prophet said about you, every community has an ameen. Every ummah has an ameen. An ameen is a trustworthy person among the community. And he says, and you are the ameen, the trustworthy person of this ummah, of the Muslim community. So this is a big status that the Prophet is saying, and that's why he's nicknamed the ameen of the ummah. So Abu Ubaida's nickname given by the Prophet is that he is the trustworthy person of the Muslim community at the time, among the companions. So a very great status. So Umar said, I want to pledge to you to be the Khalifa because I think you're one of the most qualified people. So Abu Ubaidah, what he could have done, he could have easily accepted the position and said, okay, you're right. I'm going to go ahead and do this for the betterment of the Ummah. But he didn't. He refused, he rejected, and he said, no, actually, let me give you another option. Abu Bakr is better than me. So Abu Bakr led the prayer when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was sick, and he's done other things. So he's actually more deserving. So he went and pledged to him. And Abu Bakr became the Khalifa. So that means technically, potentially, hypothetically, Abu Ubaidah could have been the first Khalifa, depending on how the circumstances, played out. But Allah wills, whatever He wills. So it shows you his status. How did he die? When he was in the Levant, which is Sham, the greater Syria, a plague broke out at the time. And when the plague broke out, Umar was the Khalifa. So Umar sent a letter immediately to him and said, I want you to come to Medina. I need you in Medina right now. So Abu Ubaidah, he got the point. He realized that Umar is trying to save his life, to call him back to Medina, and he refused. And he says, I'm not interested in saving myself and abandoning, all my soldiers and all my men in here. I cannot just leave like this. I have to stay where I am. So when Umar got the letter back from him, saying that he's going to stay there, and if the plague hits him, it's going to hit him, and obviously he's in a place where most likely he's going to get hit by the plague, Umar started crying when he received the letter out of respect for the man who is not interested in his own life. Now, how many people could actually put themselves in the same circumstance and say, yeah, I would have made the same decision? I think it's very, very difficult. We should literally be struggling with these stories. And you ask yourself, if I was in his circumstance, would I be able to have taken the same stance? I don't think most of us could honestly say to ourselves that, yeah, we would have taken the stance. So that's why these people become role models. Become role models that were not even close to being anywhere near where they were, but it's like a standard to look up to. That maybe someday we could even get near somewhere where these people were. But currently, I don't think many of us are even there. That's why it's so good to have role models who are way up there, to remind you of where you are and to remind you need to push yourself a little, rather than becoming complacent and saying, yeah, I'm a great person, everything's going great with me. So just keep checking your own nafs, keep checking yourself with these greats in history. So not long after, as expected, Abu Ubaidah was hit by the plague, and eventually he died. But before he died, he gave a farewell lecture to his soldiers and to all the Muslims at the time, and he reminded them to stick to Islam. He reminded them, don't forget your prayers, don't forget your fasting, don't forget all of these things. These are the core, most important things you can do. So imagine you were giving a farewell lecture. What would you remind people about? This is the most important thing for him. Do not leave these things, because these are your pillars of Islam. If you lose your pillars, you've lost your foundation of Islam. All right, so he reminded them about this. He reminded them, do not attach yourself to this world. And then he said, even if a man would live 1,000 years, he would still end up with the state that you see me in. And the state that he was in, he was hit by the plague, he's dying now. Even if you could live 1,000 years, you will still have to end up dying the way that I'm dying right now. And where did he get that from? Where did he get the 1,000 years and all that? It's in the Quran, right? It's in the Quran that even if you were to live 1,000 years or greater, it would not be able to benefit you. So it's in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Yeah. So that the Jews had said that he's bringing the same kind of quote from the Quran back into his statement. And this is another interesting, reflection, is that whenever you listen to the speeches of the companions or the early Muslims, you don't find them quoting Quran. And some people may wonder, why don't you don't see them quoting, you don't see them saying, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and then they quote. And Allah said, and then they quote. They just give a speech. And what happens is you wonder, why weren't they quoting the Quran, or why weren't they quoting the Prophet ﷺ as much? right? You don't always hear hadith all the time being quoted. What happens is their understanding and their knowledge of the Quran automatically is manifested in their speeches without without them directly quoting, because they go and they take a verse like this and they put it within their own context. So it's something that, it's something that today people, if you don't quote a lot, they say, I didn't hear much Quran being quoted in your speech, or I didn't hear many hadith being quoted in your speech. It's not about quoting. It's about whether or not you factored the Quran and the Sunnah into what you're talking about, right? So quoting, it helps establish your legitimacy in case somebody doubts your legitimacy by bringing proof. But it doesn't mean it has to be the case. The reason why I'm bringing this reflection, there's a famous scholar I highly respect. His name is Sheikh Abul Hasan al-Nadwi. So those of you who know, we're doing his Arabic book, but he has many, many other books. He's considered one of the greatest scholars of the 20th century. When you read his books, he rarely quotes any Quran or any hadith. And I used to always wonder, I say, he's such a great scholar. He doesn't mention almost anything from the Quran or any hadith or anything. I said, this is weird, because I'm not used to seeing something like this. But the more you study the sources of Islam, the more you look at his lectures, for example, you see that everything he's saying is directly coming from the Quran and Hadith without him actually having to quote it. And he had his own reasons for not doing that, right? So something that we have to be careful, and we have to get out of this mentality of somebody quotes something, then all of a sudden they have a strong level of authority. Because it doesn't mean they're quoting in context. It doesn't mean that they're giving you the correct interpretation. So be careful of expecting everyone to provide a quote or evidence for everything that they say, because it doesn't delegitimize what they're actually saying. Because even the companions set a precedent that they didn't used to do that regularly. So just a side note. Okay? Any questions about Abu Ubaidah? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so there was that discussion. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that we went into that long discussion. Yeah, they didn't. Yeah. Yeah. Since we already covered it, right? This was his understanding. This was his understanding. His understanding of the decree of Allah wanted me to be here, right? And this is where I'm supposed to remain. Because he was not interested in himself. Otherwise, he could have said, I'm just going to leave. So Umar wanted him to leave. It's not about which one is right and the interpretation that's right. We learn from his courage. And we learn from the fact that he's not interested in just saving himself. That was not the priority for him. So that's the important lesson for him.
I was just thinking that another aspect may be that if he did go back, he might have taken the plague with him.
That could be another aspect. That he might have taken the plague with him and affected other people. And that's what the context of the hadith was that we had mentioned. Yeah.
We want to talk about the Muslims attacking caravans for funding for their war.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the difference between attacking a caravan, which is like basically like a business? Of course, it's guarded by soldiers, or a few soldiers, maybe I don't know how many, but then like looting like a city, what's the difference?
Well, there's a world of difference. So first of all, when you're in the middle of a war, okay, the caravans are the primary means of funding that war. That's number one. Number two, these caravans were being targeted because the possessions in the caravans belonged to the Muslims. So when they left Mecca, they seized all their homes and they seized all their property, and they took their property and they're going out and trading it. Right? So this is another aspect. You have to not forget that it was their property that was also being sold. So the thing is, this is economic aspect. This is what happens. So you have to make sure that, when you're actually engaging with an enemy, if you're in a battle of war, if you're in a state of war, this is considered to be normal and standard, according to rules of war at the time. You're cutting off their supplies, you're cutting off their funding, yeah. But you're not allowed to target some random, person's caravan or something like that. It's only the people who are directly at war with you. Yeah.
I had heard from the story of the whale. That's where we get the ruling about not having to slaughter seafood.
Mm.
Are whale meat allowed?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm not aware of that. What I'm aware of that. So his question was, the story of the whale is the evidence that we do not need to slaughter seafood. I've never seen it used in the fiqh, in books of fiqh. So instead, there's a hadith where someone was on a boat, one of the companions was on a boat, and he asked about water and all of this stuff. How do we make wudu? And he said, you're allowed to use the water of the sea for wudu, and its dead animals are also considered to be okay for you to eat. So usually scholars use that hadith in Islamic law. I've never heard the whale one like being used directly. It's true. It's true, but it's not something that you find in books of Islamic law. For example, there's another hadith that talks about that al hillu maytatuhu, which means that there was people on a boat, and then they asked the Prophet ﷺ about how do we make wudu this way, and he responded and said, you can go ahead and use the seawater for wudu, for purification. It's fine. And he added some extra information in saying animals in the sea which are dead are also allowed for you. That's the primary evidence behind that. Yeah.
I heard this hadith recently from someone that there are two things that Allah has allowed the Muslims to dead. One is the seafood and grasshopper, I think.
Mm.
Some kind of
Yeah.
So there's a very Sahih hadith about it. I think that someone was recently quoting it. Someone shared.
Mm.
There are two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Locusts. They're different, but it's like same family of grasshoppers. Remember we saw the picture, the grilled grasshoppers in Islamic Law 102. You don't remember the picture? You remember the picture, right? Yeah.
My question was just different. I know that we did talk about this in the first class, the history one, but you know that this thing has been used a lot in even in Wikipedia and all that when we search about Dr. Muhammad, that even the Badr was actually a looting expedition of a caravan, and then they came to support their caravan, and the fight broke out. And it's like, I mean, the way it was portrayed is that Muslims were nothing but just people who were going out and looting caravans to fulfill their own economic desires. So, like, I know that you gave a couple of points. Is there any way we can give a couple more points to argue this thing? It's very, like,
That was one of the reasons why I wrote the Sirah book. It's for this point, right?
you did, but the thing is that, I mean, it's a very long passage that they have written on Wikipedia about this whole thing.
Yeah, I know. So I wrote a whole article on this, so I recommend just read the article. Yeah, I've written an article, yeah. Go to academia.edu. It's called The Jihad Spectrum. So I wrote a whole article on this. It gives you more arguments, inshallah. Any other questions?
You were talking about the test that they went through during the Badr and battles when they were fighting against their families. Like he was in front of his father, and I believe Abu Bakr was with his son.
Mm-hmm.
So that was for a short, I mean, it was a very large scale of test compared to nowadays, definitely, but it was a short span of time that they fought, and then some people accepted Islam, and it was over. But nowadays, not only the Muslims, but the existing like Muslim families who are born and raised in certain countries, they just always take culture over religion
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And there could be like, not big sin involved, but like little things against Sharia that they would emphasize. And if you are practicing Islam and, you're just, turning towards your deen and trying to continue on that, a lot of times you get such a difficulty that if there's no solution every time you engage with them, you would have, like a facade. I don't know which word to use. Like it would involve a lot of small sins, like riba and so on and so said this, and you're not supposed to do that, or this or that, or you would see the anger of your such a close ones, that where Allah says that you obey them, like they're in a sin level, and then they never get happy. And when I'm
When it comes to family issues and family not wanting you to practice Islam, one of the most difficult things that people face, like you said, is long-term, being ostracized by your family, and you're always trying to make them happy and trying to please them, but they're not getting happy with you and they're criticizing you and all of that. So where do you draw the line, right? The key is you have to remember that the most difficult part of this is that you're trying to please them and make them happy, right? But it's not working. You just have to accept that your job is to follow Islam, what Allah wants you to do, try your best to please them without expecting that it will actually work. And you leave that up to Allah. It's almost like when you're calling somebody to Islam, you utilize the best methods. But if that person doesn't, respond to you and they're not interested in it, what's going to happen? You have to put it up to Allah, and you leave it up to Allah and say, I've done the best that I can do, and I'm going to keep on trying to, convey the same way, but I'm not gonna get distressed over it. And this is exactly, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Kahf, وَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ. Even to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, you know what? Perhaps you're killing yourself out of grief over hoping that they're going to change. This is exactly what happens. People, they kill themselves out of grief. Why do they keep, making fun of me? Why do they keep bothering me? All you have to do is, you remember, you don't compromise your deen, and you don't try to cut relations or say something bad. You keep on trying in the nicest of ways to do your duty. And even if it doesn't work, you leave the rest up to Allah. That's the general principle. And that's where the test comes in, is the stress that you get back. It's the difficulty of, I'm doing everything that they want from me, even I'm trying to compromise in the best of ways. Even whatever they say, I do it, and then they still don't change. That's difficult, but your job is still to try your best. And you leave the results up to Allah. Okay, Al-Bara ibn Malik. So Al-Bara ibn Malik was the brother of Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik is one of the famous companions. Al-Bara, his brother, is a little bit less well known than Anas. So Al-Bara participated in the battle of Yamama against Musaylama. So we skip most of his life and we're just talking about one incident, very important, interesting. He participated in the battle of Yamama against Musaylama al-Kazzab. And we covered this story actually in the previous class. But remember when the Muslims were stuck outside the garden where Musaylama and his forces put themselves in this garden and they barricaded it, and this garden became known as the Garden of Death because of so many people died in that area. So Al-Bara was the one who came up with the idea and says, look, we are getting arrows rained down on us from the fortress where the garden is. And we need to somehow get over this door, otherwise we're going to just keep losing men. So Bara comes up with the idea and he says, you know what? Take a shield and I'm going to stand on the shield and you guys are going to lift it up and you're going to put it up on your spears and you're going to throw me over the wall and I'm going to open up the door from the inside. This is an absolutely crazy plan, but it's the only plan that would work. So they actually took Bara, he came up with the idea himself. He said, I'm going to do it myself. They lifted him up on a shield and they literally threw him over a wall. He landed, who knows if he landed on some soldiers or he landed on the floor. He got up, fought off a few soldiers, and he managed to open up the door, which completely changed the battle. So this is the thing that he's really well known for. This is like a crazy, crazy stunt, which later on, Umar actually said, a guy like Bara should never lead any army because he's too bold and too daring. He should never be in the leadership because he's going to get all his men killed with his crazy stunts. So the thing is, in every group, you need people like this because he performed a very important task. But you don't need them in leadership positions because they're going to get everybody killed, right? So it really is a good lesson in Bara that you have to be. Everyone has their own strengths, and not everyone necessarily is fit for leadership. So he was one of the guys, he changed the entire battle, extremely brave. But you can't have everybody doing something like this, catapult me over, and I'll be fine. I'm a human catapult. It's not going to work for everybody. But he survived and he made it. And this was one of the things he was really remembered for. In the Battle of Tustar against the Persians later on in the year 19, if you recall this battle, a lot of Muslims were killed because the Persians, they were in their fortresses and they had hooks. So when the Muslims were scaling the wall, they had hooks that were heated up in the fire and they were going and hooking them. Really, really painful way to die, right? So one of the hooks caught his brother, Anas ibn Malik. And when he saw that it had caught his brother, he was right next to him, he grabbed the hook, right? So he burned his own hand and he managed to save his own brother, but he ended up dying in the process. Now, if you notice something interesting, this is in the year 19 AH. When did Anas ibn Malik die? He was one of the last companions to die. He was one of the longest living companions of all the companions from the Prophet ﷺ. So what that means is his life was just saved by his own brother at this point. Otherwise, he would not have lived for such a long time. And he was one of the last people to convey the hadith. He was extremely old. He lived to a very, very old age. So it shows you the importance of, saving the life of someone and what a difference it makes. So many hadith are narrated by Anas ibn Malik and not so many by Al-Bara ibn Malik. One of the reasons is because his life was saved by his own brother. So it shows you his heroism. All right, any questions about Al-Bara?
Actually, I want to make a comment. I took blacksmithing for a couple months, and I know that hot metal, depending on the color it reaches, can reach up to like 2,000 plus degrees. It's interesting that you said he died because he died from the wounds from the fire, right?
No, we don't know exactly what, but he ended up, maybe he got caught on a hook or something like that afterwards.
Yeah, because I took blacksmithing for a couple sessions, and actually, depending on the color of the metal, it's usually like thousands of degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions on him? So it's just a very short part of his life there. All right, Asma bint Abi Bakr. So Asma was actually the half-sister of Aisha, right? Which means bint. What does bint mean? Daughter of, right? So Asma is the daughter of Abu Bakr. And changes to Abi Bakr. It's just the way that it changes. So she's the daughter of Abu Bakr. So Aisha was also a daughter of Abu Bakr, but she was the half-sister of Asma. So Asma was married to Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam, and Az-Zubair was one of those 10 people who was promised paradise as well. So we talked about how high of a status he actually has. She accepted Islam at a very early age, or early time when Islam first came. And some of the things that she did in her life. One of them is she actually was helping the Prophet, peace be upon him, and her father Abu Bakr migrate to Medina. So when they were migrating to Medina, you remember there was a secret undercover, plan of how they're going to migrate and how they're going to prepare and all of that. Abu Bakr bought the camels and was feeding them and all of that. So she was part of that plan. And part of that plan was that she was the one who was preparing the food and the water for the journey. So a very important role that she was playing. So once she prepared all of their supplies and everything, there was no cover for the food and the water and the containers that she had. So she's thinking what to do, and she actually ended up taking off her own waistband, and she tore it in half into 2 pieces, and she used it to cover the containers. So because of that, the Prophet actually commended her, and she became nicknamed Zatun Nitaqain. Nitaq is the waistband. So it means that she's the one or the possessor of the 2 waistbands. So this is an honorable title that, you sacrifice something from yourself just in order to help the journey to Medina. So it shows you the status that she has. Later on, after Abu Bakr and the Prophet migrated, she remained behind in Mecca for a while. And when Abu Bakr migrated, he took all his money with him. Because for him, everything has to be used for the Messenger of Allah and for the cause of Islam. Nothing else mattered for him. His family, he knew his family would be okay, but he didn't leave any special money for them. So what happened was, the father of Abu Bakr, he was still not a Muslim, so he started complaining. He said, look at your father, telling Asma, look at your father, he didn't even leave any money behind for you, he doesn't really care about you and all of that. Sometimes family members, they throw these things in there and just, to annoy the other person or whatever, some type of gossip or something. So he said, your father abandoned you and all of that. So Asma, she had an idea. So her idea was that there's a place in the corner of the home where Abu Bakr, her father, used to actually keep wealth, keep money. So what she did is she filled up a sack full of pebbles that kind of feel like the way the money was. They used to use coins. So it kind of feels like it's coins inside that sack. And the father of Abu Bakr was actually blind at that time. He was a very old man. He'd been blind. So what she did was, she said, no, actually, Grandpa, come over here. Actually, he left us a lot, right? And so he said, what did he leave you? He said, look, let me show you. So give me your hand. So she put his hand on the bag and said, look at all of this, So, oh, that's pretty good, So he was happy. Now, why did she do that? She did it for two reasons. Number one, she's protecting the honor of her own father, so that the grandfather cannot make fun of him or something like that. And number two, she did not want assistance from her grandfather, right? Because her grandfather was still a disbeliever, and it's that honor that a Muslim or a Muslimah has, that I don't need help from someone outside. As a Muslim, I know we're in this situation because of Islam. So what would happen is, if she had to get more financial assistance from him, it would be like, see, look what Islam has done for you. Islam made you poor. Islam made you needy. Islam made you this. Islam made you that. So she's an example of, I'm not going to put myself in a situation where anyone can even say that to me, right? So sometimes you have to guard your own reputation by maybe sacrificing a little bit more so that you protect your own honor. So this is an example what Asma was doing. So later on, Asma migrated to Medina with the rest of the Muslims. And one time her mother, who was not a Muslim, she actually came to visit her in Medina. And she came with gifts and, nice, out of respect, I'm your mother and everything. So in the beginning, Asma refused to let her in the house. She said, no, you're not, I don't even want you in my house. So much zeal for Islam. She said, oh, my own mother cannot, she shouldn't enter. Later on, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, found out about it, she was informed about this verse. The verse is a very, very important verse, which says, Allah does not forbid you from those who do not fight you because of religion and do not expel you from your homes, from being righteous toward them and acting justly toward them. Indeed, Allah loves those who act justly. This is a very, very important verse about non-Muslims and the treatment of non-Muslims. It's something that everyone should actually memorize. You should remember this reference. 60, verse 8. Chapter 60, verse 8. Because we hear it all the time. Islam treats non-Muslims this way, and you're not allowed to do this with non-Muslims and all that. And one of the things is that there are some verses which talk about how you should not take non-Muslims as your protectors and your allies and this and that. But you have to understand that in the proper context. So sometimes people, they take this as, you're not allowed to have non-Muslim friends, because it says do not take them as friends, right? Actually, what it's saying is, do not take them as awliya. Awliya meaning that do not take them as allies against the Muslims whenever there's some kind of conflict or whenever you have to make a choice. Your Muslim brothers and sisters come first. So it's very important to have this verse to help you contextualize how we're going to be dealing with non-Muslims. So otherwise, out of zeal, out of sincere zeal, you may take a position like Asma, where she says, you know what, I don't even want you inside my home. Right, because you're a disbeliever and you're not going to accept Islam, so she's not going to show that general kindness to her. And the Quran corrected her. It says, no, actually, she's not fighting you. She's not expelling you. She did not show any animosity towards you. So you should be righteous. You should be just towards them and treat them kindly and treat them nicely. You don't need to boycott them or anything like that. So it's a very important lesson that she learned and that all of us can learn. So Asma actually... this should have been prior to this. I forgot to cut and paste earlier. When she migrated to Medina, she migrated while she was pregnant. Not just pregnant. She migrated while she was highly pregnant. As soon as she arrived in Medina, she gave birth. Now think about how difficult it is to migrate when you're about 8 or 9 months pregnant. It's not an easy thing. And we're not talking, let alone flying on an airplane or let alone being on a train. We're talking about going through the desert. No technology, it's very, very difficult. So she undertook that journey. Now, why would she do that? She could have just said, I'm just going to give birth in Mecca, no problem. For her, the number one priority was it's time for me to migrate. I need to be with the Muslims. I don't want to spend an extra day in Mecca because this is where the Muslims are. It's time for me to migrate. So it shows you that when you're supposed to do something, you hasten to do it. You hasten to do something good. She didn't have to do this, but she wanted to. So she gave birth to Abdullah ibn Zubayr when she arrived at Quba. So as soon as she got on the outskirts of Medina in Quba, she gave birth to Abdullah ibn Zubayr. This was the first Muslim child which was born in Medina from the people who were migrating from Mecca. So what happened was, there's actually more of a story behind this. Since the Muslims migrated to Medina, and since Islam started spreading in Medina, no babies were born. No children were being born. So what happened was, the Jews who were, starting to spread rumors about Islam, they started to spread a rumor and saying, this is a bad omen from the fact that these people became Muslim. This is like a bad luck that's come because you accepted Islam. So one of the bad lucks is that none of the children are being born and surviving. Whatever children were born, they were dying, and none of them were being born. So the Muslims were waiting. They said, we're waiting for one child to just be born so we can disprove this rumor and this propaganda that the Jews were spreading among the people. Because you know what? People fall into superstitions very easily. You throw out one superstition out there and say, see, look, you guys aren't getting this, you guys aren't getting that. It happens all the time. If someone were to come and, let's say, just the first example that comes to my mind. Let's say some important leader left one institution, okay? And you say, you know what? Because that person left, you guys, your donations are gonna go down, no one's gonna support you anymore. And because it's a bad luck because he left or something like that. And now all of a sudden, it just so happens that coincidentally, the donations went down for whatever reason, something like that. People would start thinking, you know what? See, that rumor is right. That rumor or that superstition that someone put in their minds, that's absolutely true. People believe in horoscopes. People believe in the astrology. People believe in, look, your sign was this, and this is going to happen. And all of a sudden, it happens to one person, everyone starts believing in it. So this was the state in Medina at the time. So everyone was just hoping we can find one counter example to disprove them so that we stop getting, hearing these rumors and, the superstitions and everything. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr was that person. He was that child that was born, and everyone was extremely happy because that superstition was dispelled and put to rest, so they don't have to hear it. Because hearing some type of propaganda against Islam, it's annoying. Even if you know it's not true, it bothers you. When you have to hear this again and again, you just wish it wasn't there. So I hope this thing could just go away. The same thing. Like sometimes, Muslims wish today that, Fox News could just go away. Something like that, So it would just get rid of something so that we don't have to deal with all these things. This is exactly what was happening to them. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr was born, and everyone was happy. Talking about Asma, one of the great qualities that she had was she was very generous. So Abdullah, her son, actually said later on in life, he said, the most generous people I've ever witnessed were my mother and my aunt Aisha. The most generous people I've ever seen. So we talked about Aisha and how generous she was. So Aisha, she used to have a different way of being generous. He said she used to accumulate a lot of things and then give them away in one lump sum. He's saying this is her style. He said my mother had a different style. She used to give everything away without keeping anything, even for a moment. So two different ways of being generous, but the same way as being generous. Right? See, today we struggle with just general generosity. Here they're looking at which style of generosity does this person exhibit. Everyone is generous, but they all have their own madhab of how they're going to be their own school of thought of how they're going to be generous. So it's a very interesting analysis that you find Abdullah talking about. Despite the fact that her husband, Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, was actually quite poor, especially in the beginning. When they migrated to Medina, remember the Muslims lost everything. They lost almost all their possessions that they had. So she lived a very difficult life in the beginning. So she used to carry grain on her head for miles, several miles. She would actually have to carry it. So one time, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was riding along, and he offered her a ride because he saw her carrying it, and he said, you know what? Why don't you, jump on, the back of my camel, and I can help escort you, so you don't have to carry all of this. And of course, he was not alone. There were other companions with him in a group traveling together. So obviously, she thought about it. She reflected and said, this is going to make my life easier. But then she remembered that her husband was a very jealous person. So she said, because of the jealousy of my husband, I don't, even with the Prophet, just to be on the safe side, I'd rather not do this. So I'll just go ahead and walk. Thank you very much for your offer. And she went along. So later on, when her husband found out, he made a comment and he said, you're having to carry that grain on your head is more distressful to me than you riding with the Prophet or my jealousy or something like that. So it means that he understood, he knew he was in a state of poverty and he didn't want her to have to do all of these things. But that was what people had to do at the time, because there's no other option. When you're poor, you're poor. You have to do certain, difficult tasks in order to make some money. So it shows you the difficulty that she faced in her life. Later on, much later, so we skipped a lot about her life. Maybe we can fill it in someday. She was 100 years old. Okay, she lived for a very, very long time. So at the age of 100, what happened was her son, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, was fighting against Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. And we covered this in the previous history class. A very sad black spot in the history of Islam, of what really happened here. So Abdullah was gaining a lot of support, and then he started losing the support among the people because they were afraid of the Umayyads at that time, who were trying to seize power. So he was taking shelter in Mecca. So Hajjaj came, and we know the story about how he started catapulting the city, and even the Kaaba was damaged and all of that. So when Hajjaj and his soldiers were pretty much about to break through the city, he went to Asma, he went to his mother, who had become blind at this time. She was very, very old. And he started having a conversation with her. And he said, what? Should I give up or should I fight? What should I do? What do you advise me to do? Now, obviously, Abdullah is a very strong warrior. He's not really going there to protect himself. He's not going there to say that, I shouldn't do it. But what he's doing is he's asking his own mother, because your own mother is going to be the one who cares for you and is concerned. And if you go and do something, she's going to say, I told you not to do that. And now you got hurt, or now you got killed. So he wants to get the green light from his own mother that, I'm going to fight for what's right, but I need your support on this. But instead, he made it seem like he's consulting her. He wanted to check. So he went in and started, talking to her, and she started encouraging him, saying, if you are fighting for what is true, you keep on fighting for what is true. If you weren't fighting for the truth, then you've been wasting your time this whole time. And you can die a coward. And she started being very, very harsh with him, trying to convince him that you need to go ahead and fight. And if you're going to die, you're going to die. Go ahead and die with honor than if you give up and you get humiliated in front of everybody else. So she bade farewell to him, and she kissed him, and she let him go. It shows you what type of woman she was. That she was a woman who the truth is more important than having her own son to be there just so that she could feel comfort in her own son. So those of you who have children, and now that I have children, I look at this story in a completely different way. If you don't have children, it's different. It changes, right? So I remember people, Sheikh Faqih used to always talk about, imagine your children like this and like that. He says you won't understand it until you have children. And when you have children, it just changes completely. Then you start thinking, it's easy to read a story like this and say, yeah, if it's for the sake of Allah, we have to sacrifice. But when you raise those kids, right, and you spend so much time with them and you have so much love for them, now the test really comes, right? Now you start changing and say, how could I sacrifice my own kids? Right, that's when it changes. So just think about, especially those people who have kids, they can understand how difficult of a decision this is, and what a strong woman she really was to give up her own son, especially when you're in the last age of life. You have very few things that actually give you some pleasure in life, and your kids would be one of those things. So for her, the truth stands out from falsehood. The truth takes priority and precedence over everything. So when he was leaving, she gave him one last hug, and she felt that there was something here, and she said, what is this? She This is my plate of armor. At least I can stand up a little bit longer before I get killed. She says, no. You take this plate of armor off and you wear some clothes that when you die, because you're going to die anyways. She knew that. When you die, you're going to die a dignified death. You're protected, you're covered. When you're buried, we can bury you in a nice way. So he did that. So it shows you what type of woman she really was. So it's Asma, Yusuf. Mm. So if somebody argues that these are like suicide missions, see, the thing is, suicide is committed by someone who is usually given up on life. They're not interested in doing anything. They're not interested in wanting to be alive anymore. They have nothing to live for. They go and kill themselves. That's one type of suicide. The second is suicide in the sense of like suicide bombing, or going and trying to remove some of the enemy while you know that your own life is going to be taken. In this case, it's a little bit different, although it's somewhat similar. It's a little bit different in the sense it's not considered suicide, in the sense that you're likely going to die, but you're not actually killing yourself, right? So you're fighting against an enemy that, you're probably going to end up getting martyred. You're going to end up getting killed. But suicide is when you take your own life rather than somebody else taking your life. So maybe the people might just change or feel bad for you, or you might actually end up defeating them somehow, by small armies defeating larger armies. So it doesn't fall in the category of suicide. But if someone were to argue that, well, this is the basis for suicide bombing, assuming that you're actually killing soldiers, not you're killing innocent people, right? These type of incidents are what the scholars use to say that committing something like that when there's no other option and there's no other circumstance for you is not considered against Islamic law. As long as you're doing everything else in the right way, there could be a basis for that, and they use these type of stories from it. It would be a very good research. There's a lot of research actually about it. So this is like Sheikh Qaradawi. He's considered to be a very prominent scholar throughout the world, respected by almost all groups. One of the most, he usually stays out of all controversy and all of that. But the thing that people get him on the most, especially non-Muslims, people who don't like Islam, is his position on suicide bombing. Yeah, Sheikh Salman is the same. So a lot of scholars had this opinion, but with the caveat that many people miss. Number one, they can't be innocent people, okay? And obviously, whenever you hear in America suicide bombing, it's automatically associated that no one who hates Islam cares about the fact that the Muslim is going to take his own life, right? They don't care about his own life because they don't like Islam anyways. What they're concerned is they're killing innocent people. So we should actually not allow the two terms to be conflated with each other, right? So when you say suicide bombing, and they say these Muslims are committing suicide bombing and they're going and killing people, do they have a problem with the fact that a Muslim is killing himself? They don't care for it. Most people who have a problem with suicide bombing, the issue is not that the Muslim is killing himself, right? Number two, the issue is not that a bomb is being used rather than a sword or a gun or a tank or whatever other means. The issue is that you're killing innocent people. So they've used these two terms in a type of propaganda to actually focus on dismantling the Palestinian cause. So there's politics involved. So just keep that one thing in mind. So Sheikh Qaradawi and other shuyukh, what they're saying is the concept of it, as long as you're not killing innocent people, that's number one. Number two is if there's no other way for you to fight back and there's no other potential, then this is a legitimate means of fighting back because you have no other option. If you have another option, somebody's oppressing you and you have to go and find a gun, or you have to go and find whatever it is to go and fight back, you have to do that. But if there's no other option, there's no other way to actually inflict any harm on an enemy soldier, this is going to be allowed. So what Sheikh Qaradawi, for example, he says, and we cannot judge the circumstances from the outside as an outside observer, because we don't know what's happening on the ground in an area. So it's up to the people to decide whether they're in that circumstance, and Allah is going to judge them based upon their own knowledge of their own circumstances. That's his position. And he got in trouble sometimes entering to London because the new governor gave him a problem, especially on this point. So how could you justify this and justify that or whatever? But they don't read his whole. There's a lot of. It's very important to read the entire statement of somebody. Like Sheikh Qaradawi, for example, he says some certain things about buying a home with the mortgage, right? If you read the conditions that he says, it's not just you can buy a home. There's conditions. He says that music is allowed, and then he gives you 5 conditions. Read the 5 conditions under which music is allowed. Right? He doesn't say you listen to 50 Cent. And, yeah, it's cool, man. He's talking about this and that. Read the conditions, and it clarifies. But what people do is they take the fatwa and they don't read the rest of it. It becomes a one-liner fatwa. So alhamdulillah. Anyways, yeah. So the thing is, when you're wearing the armor, right? In order for you to be able to move and be flexible and everything, there's a lot of breaks. So what happens when you get killed? Sometimes there's a possibility where your body's going to be exposed because you are wearing armor in different places. If you're wearing a long garment, right? Even if you get killed, because the garment is long and its armor is tight, and garments are going to be loose. So what she was saying is, you're going to look more honorable. Your body, when you die, is going to look more honorable and respectable if you were wearing looser, normal clothing rather than armor. So that's what she wanted him to do. And he accepted her wish.
So she's saying that your aura will recover, basically.
Your what? Yeah, aura, and also it's gonna look undignified, and you know that they might actually end up mutilating you or something like that. So die with honor and with respect, wearing something nice. That was her point. I mean, it makes it tight again, probably. So we don't know exactly what kind of armor they were using. So, I mean, you can assume that she knew something about armor. Yeah. Yes. I don't know. I can't tell you exactly.
Today that, if the body is buried with any metal attached to that or over it, it can explode under the ground, the body. It's scientifically
Interesting.
understood that because there was a body.
Because of the metal, it heats up or something like that underground.
The metal does that.
Interesting.
At the mortuary, people were explaining today that there was a body in the wood cascade which was very light at the bottom, and then there were holes, and it was not nailed. There was nothing nailed. So they said that once you put the body in the ground, with this, eventually with the dust, it's going to go all dissolve with the dust, and sort of it. And there was a cascade with metals, and then they said that it would, when you put it under with the pressure, or if there is a metal even moving, or it will explode the body.
So the metal, when you bury the person, can explode part of the body. Interesting. Interesting. Very interesting. Good question. Abdullah was. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, so she died. Yeah, soon afterwards. Oh, she probably told the story as well to other people. Yeah, to other people. How old was he? So he was 10 when the Prophet ﷺ died. So, well, basically he was born at the Hijrah, right? So you just calculate what year did this invasion of Mecca by Hajjaj take place. Does anyone remember what year it was? When Hajjaj came to Mecca, when was this? The Hijri year. We can go back.
Maybe like late 70s or 80s, because he was one of the oldest Sahaba in
Hmm.
Karbala happened in the 60s,
Hmm.
63 or 64, right?
I'll tell you what, we'll take a break, and I'll check for you in the break, and I'll let you know after the break. Yeah, I'll let you know after the break, inshallah. All right, inshallah, let's take a 10-minute break. Come back at 9:10, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Skip lunch again, Sheikh Mustafa?
Huh?
Skip lunch again?
Yes, I did. Too many things in the community, man. Give Zohar the dog?
I give it to Miriam.
Oh, good.
She's downstairs.
Even better.
Yeah. I talked to Jamil yesterday. He told me he wanted me to give you this proposal for debate.
Oh, okay. Alright, I'll read it.
Yeah, he came because he said he ordered his book and it never came in. The second one
Which book?
for this class.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so I had to let him borrow it for the next one. But he's leaving pretty soon, March 6th.
Yeah?
March 6th.
That's good, man.
Thank you.
And then, other than
How's your meal?
still going.
Are you going to post an outline walk for the research class?
Yeah, that's a good question. I need to. Send me a reminder if you can.
Okay. You didn't go? Was it you had to work later?
I let him borrow it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He said the house was too far.
Are Muslims, because of their fasting, because of their like self-restraint and moderation and lifestyle, exempt from the scientific fact that humans need 2,000 calories per day?
It's not a fact. It's a recommendation.
So are Muslims like practicing Muslims that fast Ramadan or like moderate in their diet?
I know.
Do they have to eat as much as like non-Muslims, or can they get by with eating less?
No, I mean, even non-Muslims can get by with less. It's just recommended that they say, to sustain yourself. It depends on your lifestyle and all of that stuff. Depends on the type of food you eat as well.
So it varies with Muslims too. Sometimes I go like half a day without eating anything.
And then all of a sudden, on my messages, it was your name was gone.
You'll be okay, but nobody should eat. If you feel tired,
I had another contact and I texted it, so I texted my address to a random number.
I wonder why it came.
Yeah, it came late. So I can check. Here was the first book of the day. So,
fire coming soon, huh?
because we were doing some stuff in class today, my teacher kind of just rips her too. Like says she's like inconsistent academic and stuff. But honestly,
So why do you pick the book?
I didn't ask him for the same question. But in her chapter about jihad, she just like I don't know. She sounds like a Fox News correspondent. Okay. So like she kind of gave me like the urge to change my research topic. Too late, or what do you think? 'Cause she's totally.
How much we should do? 2 years after 72.
Really?
Did you say 70? The beginning of 70.
Okay, it's talking about the fight against
How the conflict began in 70, right?
in the beginning of 70 AH. Makkah at that time was surrounded by Hajjaj army. It took 2 years. And I'm sorry.
I do people like that all the time.
It is between 70 and 72.
People like keeping up to I hate that.
So I haven't done a lot of research, but I have all the materials. I have like 5, 6 articles, 2, 3 books.
What are you doing now?
I'm going to talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
The thing is with that
You've
one,
not done the reading now?
I've just skimmed the table of contents.
You can change.
Yeah. she really does the whole song spread by the sword here.
So do it. I think it's more relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's important
And
that
it-
someone write a good response.
It's more like the other one is more like vague kind of.
Yeah.
This is more like clear question.
Yeah, do it.
So should I make it more about jihad or more about did Islam spread by the sword? 'Cause I only have like 5 pages here.
The good book by Thomas Arnold called Preaching from Islam. Christian guy trying to show that Islam did not spread by the sword, and the Orientals should stop saying it. Written in 1890. Very interesting. I'm reading it myself right
He's
now.
Christian.
He is Christian.
He's dead already, right?
There's actually a lot of it shouldn't be hard to find. So do you think I shouldn't even worry about looking for like Islamic sources like way back then?
Yeah, you can use modern sources as a secondary source.
But I should get some primary sources? Because they're not going to be talking. They're not going to be defending if Islam spread by the sword.
You're gonna find all the primary sources you need in the secondary source.
Okay.
Like, it should be sufficient. Quran, Hadith.
Okay. Well, within that, I should be talking about kind of the first initial conquests and the rationale behind it. Because in this book, she says that she calls jihad religious imperialism. She calls it missionary warfare. It's
You should come out an analysis and make an alternative term
instead
that
of
people can use.
okay.
But something clever like that.
Because I can just use her book as all refutations, or her chapter on it.
And search journals. You should find a lot in journals.
Okay. I
There
think
should be a
did
lot written
Dr.
about
Jackson wrote something on jihad, but is that
Jihad in the modern world. No, it's not related.
not related? Okay. She's so bad. In the first two sentences in the chapter about Muslims and non-Muslims, she says how non-Muslims, according to Islam, are subhuman, and like their blood is totally halal and stuff. And then in the footnote, I looked at who said this: 13th century Islamic poet. Like it's not even a scholar or anything, just some random poet.
I think really it wouldn't surprise me if she herself believes that Muslims are subhuman. Really, that's
Seriously,
it's radical, man. You know her background?
no.
I mean, I'm assuming, I don't know either, but I'm assuming she must be some kind of like radical Christian or something like that.
Yeah, because she always pulls the Christian card. Like
She is, right?
Christian. She goes. Oh, she says the initial conquest by the Arabs is not real jihad because they were not sincere, and they wanted the war spoils. And this is evident because religion cannot spread by the sword; has to spread through mercy. And they prove that they're not doing that, so therefore it's not real jihad. Even though later she calls jihad religious imperialism, she contradicts herself. So.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're a hypocrite.
Or clear agenda. But anyways, all right. So I'll change my topic then.
Interesting.
I'm gonna take off. Sorry.
I'm tired, man.
No, I have to work. Good work. And I'm tired. And I'm a little bit sick.
No problem, man. You enrolled for next quarter?
I'm happy. Huh?
You enrolled for next quarter?
No, I don't find any classes which
Islamic law?
I haven't taken any of them. So what?
Is it Islamic Law 3?
4.
Oh, wow.
You didn't take one? You didn't take one?
I didn't take any of them because I didn't take the first one. So I'm like, okay, so let's not just take the other ones. I didn't take any of them. I wanted to take one. No, I
Public
wanted
speaking?
to.
But you can't make it on Sundays.
Unless my wife kicks me out of the house because I think she will. If I take Sunday class,
I can arrange that.
no, because I'm actually on the last one.
It's
Every
8
day I'm
a.m.
getting.
now. It's 8 a.m. now. It's been changed, you know.
Here's the thing. I get home every day lately at 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10.
Even when there's no class.
When there's no class. What are you doing? Working. Name side business, remember?
You guys are from the same tribe.
And then I'm also working on Saturdays and Sundays, and then Saturdays I go play cards with friends. So it's like, I just she's gonna give up on me. That okay, do whatever
You gotta cut down on the cards, man.
And like not last quarter, but the before I took 2 classes, and that was like, that's why this one I'm taking with no.
Just take the online one.
No.
You know what?
Islamic, I
might add Islamic Law 1 on Thursday.
What about that other guy that you were talking to about, I forgot his name, about
It's in the future.
but not for this. If I take,
If we add Islamic Law 1 on Thursday, would you attend?
there's no class on Thursday? We only do Tuesday and Friday?
Tuesday and Sunday.
Yeah, if you do Islamic Law 1 on Thursday, I'm there.
You're in for sure. I might be confirming by the end of this week. That's not going to be me teaching.
No, then I'm not in. Who will be teaching?
Jamal Diwan's wife,
She's so smart.
Sheikh Abu Sulma.
She's very smart.
So we
Can I
got you
take a
in?
couple of classes and then decide?
Huh?
I'm not going to do any homework. I
You
cannot
don't have to do any homework.
because I don't have time.
Don't do homework. Just come.
Yeah, I'll enroll in
You'll
everything.
enroll in
Pay the
everything.
fee and everything. Yeah.
Okay. We just need people who are going to confirm. Okay.
Sheikh Muslim was very smart. They both know the
Right
same.
now I have to go.
Okay.
Inshallah, sorry about that.
We got a new. We've hired a new outreach coordinator.
Yeah, I saw, he when he was here, I saw him.
Guess what he likes to eat?
Sushi.
Big sushi.
Yeah, that's good.
We've eaten it like 5 times in the last week and a half.
Wow. That's like every day.
So take
He's lucky that he has you. I don't get
So
it.
next time you want to arrange sushi, arrange it with him. That I have to have a meeting with him anyways, and then you got me for sushi.
Okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, inshallah.
He's your guy now.
I don't see him otherwise. I just saw him on the other day and then a couple of times last week.
He hasn't moved yet, so his apartment's getting ready. So he lives in Pomona. You'll see him more inshallah once he moves.
My next, inshallah, whenever we meet, I want to talk to you about Sheikh Hassan Rani. You know, because
I've been hearing a lot of stuff.
I'm sitting down, he's getting to me.
Good.
Then there are a few things where I'm like, I don't appreciate Mustafa al-Agri and I want to see him sitting here.
I'm hearing some stuff. Yalla.
He's very, about those Sahih and everything. He's exploring a lot of things
Yeah. We'll sit down.
I have a quick question.
It's time.
Very quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there any, both in two respects, is there any example of a Sahaba who were good on Islam and then began to like deteriorate in their character and then came back again and were good again? And is there any example
Yes.
of modern day Muslims that happened to modern day Muslims?
Yes.
For example, they started Islam
Yes.
good,
Yeah, there are.
but then they deteriorated,
Yeah.
but Allah brought them back
Yeah.
again.
There's a lot of them. Yeah. I'll give them to you later, inshallah. But there's a lot. Yeah.
Sahabas that did that?
Yes.
I
Yes.
heard there was one Sahaba that actually betrayed the Muslims.
That's
the Prophet forgave him.
that's one of
What
them.
was the name?
I'm thinking what his name was. I have to recall, but it was during the conquest of Mecca. I'll get you his name, inshallah. Okay?
So he was in Mecca.
No, but he sent a letter to the Meccans.
Oh, he was in Medina.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay,
I'll talk
thank
to you
you.
later,
Thank
inshallah. Okay, let's get back to it. Everyone has a choice.
Time sensitive. Samina told me to tell you that she has a time sensitive issue regarding you that she needs to use her regarding you.
Can I call her at 10 on my way home?
Yeah, probably. That's fine.
I'll call her on my way
But
home.
it's just told me to tell you it's time sensitive.
Okay, I'll call her on the way home, inshallah. All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So Abdullah ibn Hudhafa. So Abdullah ibn Hudhafa was one of the 6 people whom the Prophet, peace be upon him, commissioned as an envoy in the 6th year after Hijrah to go and send letters. So if you recall, when did the Prophet decide to send letters to different rulers around the world at that time? No, I know not the year after Hudaybiyah. That's the key, right? So after there was peace, right, now they have an opportunity to send these letters and let people know about Islam. So the importance of peacetime relationships makes a world of difference in terms of how you can engage with other people. So Abdullah was one of the people who was sent to a land, and he was sent to the Persians. So Khusro or Kisra, Parvez, right, was the leader of Persia at the time. So imagine Abdullah ibn Hudhafa going in to visit the Persian king, the Persian leader, emperor, and he sees the luxury and he sees all the carpets and all the fancy palace that he's living in and everything like that. And like we talked about, most people, they kind of, when they experience this amount of luxury, it's overwhelming for them. They just can't handle it, and they start, becoming so impressed by it. So he saw everyone wearing nice robes and silk and all these things, and he's wearing the coarse clothing of a Bedouin. Very simple life, simple lifestyle. But you see that Abdullah ibn Hudhafa was not affected by that luxury. He still stood proud as a Muslim, because for him, these worldly things had nothing in their sight. And that should be the status of a Muslim. No matter what kind of luxury you see, no matter what money somebody's trying to offer you, no matter what kind of cars people have in their parking lot or whatever it is, this doesn't define who a person is. It's not how much money they have, it's not the house they have, it's not the... So for a Muslim, if you want to appreciate architecture, okay, you can appreciate architecture. You want to appreciate the build of the car, or it's the style of it is, that's fine. You can say, wow, Rolls Royce, they happen to build very nice cars. I like the way that they engineer their vehicle. But if you start thinking that these people are driving these luxurious cars, and that starts to get to your heart, you know that you've gone far away from the path of Islam and far away from the path of the companions. So you never get impressed by the fact that someone has all of these luxuries or something like that. So for Abdullah, he was not affected by any of these things. He just walked in there and saying, you know what? For him, he's seeing all this luxury, but it comes back down to, I'm worshiping Allah and these people are worshiping fire. That's the most important thing for me. So this doesn't impress me at all. And that's the way that believers should be. So he walked up there, strong, confident, firm. And, it's the reason why I'm mentioning this is we're challenged. We're afflicted and we're tested by people who have power and people who have wealth today. So you find that many, many times when people are dangling the carrots, as they say, in front of you, dangling the wealth in front of you, giving you opportunities, or you get a trip to a special palace of a leader, or you get a trip to the White House or something like that, and you're willing to do whatever it takes, you're willing to sacrifice whatever it is just because you get that honor, and you're so impressed by all of that. Remember the story of Abdullah ibn Hudhafa, who went to a Persian court, which is considered to be, even by all historians, the Persians had more wealth than even the Roman Empire. There's probably not a single empire that had more luxury in their court than the Persians had. And it didn't bother him, it didn't affect him, he didn't even think about making not even the smallest compromise. So he came with the letter, and they tried to take the letter from him and said, we're going to deliver it to the Kisra. And he said, no. My prophet told me I'm supposed to hand this letter directly to your leader, and this letter is not leaving my hand unless I hand it to him directly. Now imagine you're a guy dressed in probably ripped up, tattered clothing in this giant palace. People are staring at you. You're like, do you know imagine what they were thinking. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? You're in no shape, you're in no position to make a demand like that to us. Look how you're dressed and look at us. We're the superpower of the day. But Abdullah had the firm confidence. No, if you want this letter, I'm going to deliver it personally to him. You like it or you don't like it. So eventually they said, okay, fine, go and hand it to him. So he handed it to him, just as a symbolic gesture. And of course, he handed it off to his translator. So the Arab translator started reading the letter. And the letter was calling Kisra to Islam, just like all the other letters called other people to Islam. So we saw in the previous class, he became furious, he became very mad, and he ripped the letter into pieces. And he got very upset. So Abdullah, saw the anger and everything. He's not a fool either. He's not going to stick around and see what happens to him. He immediately left, jumped on his camel, and rode back to Medina. Because he doesn't know the guy's going to kill him, torture him, whatever it is, so he left. When he told the Prophet, peace be upon him, what happened, that's when he made this dua. He said, may Allah tear up their kingdom. One of the very few times where he actually made a dua against somebody. He said, may Allah tear up their kingdom because he tore up my letter. It's something that you don't do. It's not considered to be a proper etiquette or the proper custom, right? So he was the person who was commissioned to deliver the letter. So that's one important thing about the companion. The second important thing is that during the time of Umar, when Umar was Khalifa, Abdullah was captured by the Roman forces. He was captured by the Byzantines. So the leader came and pressured him to become a Christian. So you need to become a Christian. You need to accept it. And Abdullah's response was, I'd rather die 1,000 times than to leave Islam and to become a Christian. So it shows you the honor and the courage that he had to stand up for his religion. So the ruler was impressed. So I've never seen someone so bold and so courageous. I need people like this, right? Because what happens when you live in among superpowers and you live among high civilizations, when they're at the peak of their power, you find even the people who are in administration, it's hard to find good people because they're so spoiled by the luxury. So he's looking for someone who's strong and dedicated. So the leader says, this is a guy I can recruit. So he thinks, okay, you know what? I was threatening his life and he's not willing to, the threat didn't work. Right? The carrot or the stick, right? He said, I tried the stick and it didn't work. So let's try the carrot technique. He said, if you become a Christian, not only will you be spared, I'm going to make you my special advisor. You're going to have a special position and status in my court. So he tried that technique. And obviously, Abdullah refused. So then he goes back to the stick again. So he says, now we're going to torture you then. If you're not going to leave your religion, we're going to torture you. So they put him up on a cross. And remember, I mentioned a cross is not always a cross. A cross is something that you tie a person to, right? So they tied him to one of these things, and they started throwing spears at him. Imagine target practice. This is a type of torture. It's psychological torture, right? Because it's almost like waterboarding, right? Because waterboarding is you feel as if you're drowning. Even though you're not drowning, you're not going to die for the most part. The rest of your body is going to be okay, but it's that feeling. Same if someone's throwing knives at you, and even if they're not hitting you, it's extremely psychological torture that they're going to be doing to you. So this is what happened to him. They started throwing a bunch of spears at him. They didn't hit him, but they were throwing it at him, right? So it didn't bother him. He's like, you know what? If I die, I die. If I get tortured, I get tortured. I'm not going to leave Islam no matter what. So then they decided, okay, we're going to bring this cauldron of boiling liquid. It says water in your book. Other books, they says oil. And oil heats a lot more than water does. And you can imagine how painful this would be. It's the worst thing that can happen. So then they brought one of the Muslims, and he has his own story. They brought one of the Muslims and they threw him in. And they described what actually happened. He actually described it later on. He said his skin shriveled up and his bones started popping out. Imagine if you were to be thrown into boiling oil. What would happen to your body? It would be, not only is it painful, imagine what would actually happen to your body if it was boiling. This is the type of torture that they used to have. So one Muslim got thrown in who was captured and he was dead. He was killed. So then Abdullah started crying. So the leader, he thought, you know what? Now I've cracked him. Because he's still interested in Abdullah. Why? Because he showed his boldness. So he still wants to convince him. So he started crying. And the leader thought, okay, we got him now. So he called him up and he says, are you ready now to become a Christian? And he said, no. He said, why were you crying then? He said, I was only crying because I wish I had more souls. Allah had given me more lives so I could keep getting thrown into that cauldron for the sake of Allah and I would keep dying. Why? Because I know how much reward there is in going through this type of persecution. So number one, he's saying, I wish I could not only do it once. I'm not ready to just get thrown in. I wish I could keep getting thrown in again and again and again. So he's doing two things. Number one, he's talking about how he's not afraid of death. Number two, he's actually showing the leader that no matter what you do to us, Muslims, our faith is so firm, you cannot mess with us. We only have one life. If we had more lives, you could keep on killing us and we're not going to deter. So it shows you the strength the courage that he actually has. And the leader was extremely impressed because it's very rare to find a person like this. So then he decided, you know what? Okay, this is such an honorable man. He had so much respect for Abdullah. I want to let this man go, but I cannot just let him go like this because it'll look bad on me. He has to save his own face as a leader. So he said, okay, are you willing to at least kiss my forehead? Kiss me on the forehead. There's a sign of respect that, you're captive and you're captured. You kiss my forehead to show that you've submitted, but you don't leave Islam, you don't become a Christian, but we will let you go. So Abdullah says, if I kiss your forehead, what about the other Muslims? Will you let them go too? He said, I will let all of them go if you just come and kiss me on the forehead. So he surrendered. He gave up and he said, okay. He was thinking, you know what? I'm not leaving Islam. I'm showing humility, but this is not about arrogance. This is not about me trying to show that I'm better than him or whatever it is. We're saving lives here. So yes, this is a type of compromise, but it's a compromise that is not related to Islam. It's a compromise that's related to his own ego. And he said, my ego doesn't matter. When it comes to Islam, I will die. When it comes to my ego, there's no problem with compromising on my own ego. So he went up and he kissed him on the forehead, and the leader agreed. He released all the prisoners. And when they went back to Umar, he told him the whole story. Umar said, everyone now needs to kiss the forehead of Abdullah. And he says, I'm going to start. And he went up and he kissed his forehead. Everyone else kissed his forehead. Because he said, because he had to do it, everyone deserves to kiss his forehead as well to show him that respect because what he made. So it shows you a few important lessons there. Number one, when it comes to your religion, when it comes to Islam, that's when you shouldn't be compromising. Now, when it comes to torture, remember the story of Ammar ibn Yasir. If you can't handle the torture and it's very difficult for you, then yes, you're allowed to go ahead and pretend and say some words to save your own life. But what is better is if you were to sacrifice yourself for the sake of Allah. Now, it's not something that everyone can do. I don't know if many of us in this room would be able to do it if we were in the circumstance. Easy to talk about it. But if we were in the circumstance, would we be able to do it? I don't know. So Allah has given us this alternative where if we can't handle it, we're allowed to go ahead and make certain statements as long as it's not in our heart. But if you look at the stories of these people, they were willing to give up everything, even for not resembling or even making a statement which would be something against Islam, which is the superior option, but it's not necessarily prohibited if you are in a circumstance like that. So this is Abdullah ibn Hudhafa. Any questions? Okay. Abdullah ibn Jahsh. Yeah.
Was it his strong faith or was it his character, like his fitra that kept him from not fearing death?
It was a strong faith. Yeah. Abdullah ibn Jahsh. He was a cousin of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he was the brother of Ubaidullah ibn Jahsh, who was the husband of of Ramla, right? Habiba, right? So he is the one who went to Abyssinia and then left Islam. So Abdullah was also one of the first few people to accept Islam. He had also migrated to Abyssinia and come back. So after he migrated to Medina, Abu Sufyan actually seized his home, seized all the belongings in his home. So he started feeling very bad and sad about that. He lost everything. So he went to the Prophet complaining. And he says, you know what, they took my home, they took all my possessions and everything, what should I do? So the Prophet ﷺ comforted him and said, aren't you satisfied with the home in paradise instead of what you had? So he was content. Now the thing is, just think about that. And he was sincerely content. If we were to lose something, and then someone told us, you know what, you have a home in paradise instead. Many people really, how many people would feel content and say, you know what, that's great. I'm more than satisfied because I have a home in paradise. Or I think many people, our mentality would be, well, that's nice, but what about my home? There's a difference, a world of difference. For many people, there's something in the psychology that it's too far off. Paradise and the next life is too far off. And they want to have the rewards now. And there was an experiment. I don't know if I mentioned in this class or not. There was a psychological experiment. Did we talk about it in this class? Yeah, we did, right? So we talked about experiment, that people want the thing now and they're willing to take less for it. We need to make sure that we not succumb to that way of understanding. So it's a very good lesson. He just, he was told, that's it. You're going to have a house in paradise. And immediately when it hit him, he's like, you know what? Why should I cry over something that I've already lost? This is more important that the Prophet is telling me this. So he was comforted by that. He was one of the companions who were given the first military assignment in Islam prior to the Battle of Badr. So one of the things was they were supposed to go out and gather intelligence from the Quraysh to find out what they're doing and what they're up to. Because remember, the Muslims migrated to Medina. It doesn't mean that the Quraysh just all of a sudden say, oh, you migrated to Medina? Okay, then we're friends and everything is peaceful. Forget everything that happened in the past, you know? Now that you're gone, let's just start from zero again. It wasn't starting from zero. There was a state of perpetual war, Cold War, yet alone, but still perpetual war between them. Right? So what happened was the Prophet was very intelligent. He's not just going to sit there and say, well, let's just sit in Medina and let's build the masjid and let's do all these other things and inshallah everything's going to be fine. He knew that there's going to be a danger. There's a perpetual danger remaining from the Quraysh even though the Muslims had migrated to Medina. So he was always keen on gathering intelligence to see what are they up to. Are they planning to attack us? Are they going to do this? Are they going to do that? What's their strategy? So he sent out an expedition to gather intelligence, and he made Abdullah ibn Jahsh the leader of that expedition. So he gave a letter to Abdullah, who's the leader, and he said, I want you to travel to this location, and you only open this letter after 2 days, which will give you further instructions on what to do. So he opened the letter after 2 days, and the letter said that you need to go to this destination, which is Nakhla, which is close to Mecca. Now he said, do not force anyone who doesn't want to go with you. Anyone who's not prepared to go with you, don't force them. Let them come back to Medina if they don't want to go. Now why would he say something like that?
This is dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. Because the Muslims just migrated to Medina. Now a Muslim to be on the outskirts of Mecca, if they're seen, they're going to be killed. State of war, right? So they said, if you don't want to go for it, it's not a problem. Why? Why would he give them an exception? We had covered it. Did we cover it in the first class? I don't remember or not. That's true. He didn't want any weak believers to be with him, but there's something else. There's another aspect of it. Some of them from the Ansar. So why does that make a difference? Exactly. The pledge of Aqaba was defensive rather than offensive, and you're outside the city of Medina. So you said that you're going to protect in the city of Medina, so you can't force them to go out in an expedition unless they voluntarily do that. So they were ordered to go to Nakhla, so all of them agreed anyways, right? Just to show you that the Prophet gave him the option. They all agreed. If the Prophet wants us to do this, we're going to do it. So they all went to Nakhla. It says Makhla, but it should be with an N. So Nakhla, which is outside of outside of Mecca, to gather enemy intelligence. So that was their mission. So what happened was they actually spotted a caravan from the Quraysh. And remember, this is right after the migration, exactly when their property and their possessions had been seized. And remember, Abdullah ibn Jahsh was one of the people who just lost his home and his possessions. So when they saw a caravan, what's likely to be in that caravan? Some of their possessions, his own possessions, right? So he says, you know what, this is the time we need to get it back. So on the last day of Rajab, they saw the caravan, and they were deciding, should we go and attack that caravan and take our stuff back, or should we not do it? The problem is, Rajab is one of the 4 sacred months among the Arabs, and even among the Muslims, among the Arabs at the time. You're not allowed to fight during those 4 months. So what happens is, if they're going to go and attack this caravan, they're not allowed to according to Arab custom. And there's no rules in Islam yet in terms of, do we have to follow this, do we not follow this? At the same time, if they wait till the next day, the caravan is gone, and they lost their opportunity. So they were debating and consulting, what should we do? They decided, we're going to go ahead and take the caravan. So they went and they killed 1 man, they captured 2 people, and the 4th man from the caravan, he escaped back to Mecca, and he informed, look what the Muslims did. So what happened was, now this news started going around Arabia. Look, the Muslims broke our custom, our tradition, that Rajab is a sacred month and you're not allowed to violate the sacred month. So when they returned back to Medina, the Prophet was furious with them. He said, I ordered you to gather information only. I didn't order you to attack any caravan, and I'm free of what you have done against, these people. This was wrong of you. So he released the prisoners, he released the caravan, returned all the wealth, and this incident started hurting the reputation of the Muslims very badly. And the Muslims started feeling very bad for what they've done. So now this is the important thing. Because of the actions of some Muslims who made a mistake, the entire Muslim community is suffering now in terms of their reputation. Very similar to what happens. It sounds very familiar, right? But here's the key. What was Allah's response to this incident? The response was, the verse came and it's addressing the Quraysh propaganda that was being spread around. It's not just false, it's not false propaganda. It did happen. Yes, it was a mistake. But they're using it and saying, look at the Muslims, look how they are, look at this, look at that. The response of the Quran is, they ask you about the sacred months, about fighting in the sacred months. So what does that mean? The verse is actually talking about, they're asking you if the sacred months are still considered to be sacred where we're not supposed to be fighting in them. So the response is, say to the Prophet, say, O Muhammad, fighting therein is a great sin. So the Quran says, the custom of the Arabs at this time remains in Islam. You should not be fighting. It's a great sin to actually fight in that month. So it validates the fact that they were not supposed to attack the caravan. And Muslims are going to uphold these 4 sacred months as well. But it doesn't stop, right? So this is like an apology saying, yes, what they did was wrong. But then it says, but averting people from the way of Allah and disbelief in Him and preventing access to the masjid, preventing access to Mecca, and the expulsion of its people therefrom are greater evil in the sight of Allah. And fitna, meaning tribulations and like, in this context you translate fitna as like, what's the, mischief, oppression, yeah. Oppression is greater than killing. So think about what it's responding now to the Quraysh. It's telling the Muslims and it's telling the Quraysh that yes, it's a great sin to violate the holy month. And we're sorry for what happened. They don't represent what the Prophet stood for. But don't try to use this as a propaganda to think that you have the higher moral ground because we made one mistake. You are the people who avert people away from the way of Allah. You disbelieve in Him. You do not allow the Muslims to even access Mecca. You expelled its people because the Muslims had to be kicked out of Mecca and they had to migrate to Medina. So that's even greater evil in the sight of Allah than violating the sacred month. So it's reminding people, says, you know what? Yeah, there's a group of Muslims who did something. But what you're doing is much worse than that. So don't think that all of a sudden you're exonerated because someone else has done something bad. And this is very similar to the circumstances which we live in, right? Yeah, there are some bad Muslims and they do some things which are wrong. That doesn't mean that you can go ahead and bomb entire countries and decimate their entire population and then say, see, look, there's a few bad ones right there. Same principle applies. And it's right there in the Quran. So it speaks about what is true, but then it says, but don't think that all of a sudden, you can justify yourselves this way. So good response to propaganda. Just wait a second. So they were the verse was trying to show the hypocrisy of the Quraysh about their complaint and the propaganda that they were spreading around. And later on, during the Battle of Uhud, this should be tabbed the other way around, Abdullah prayed for martyrdom, and he got it at the Battle of Uhud. He was martyred in the Battle of Uhud, and he was killed. So that's Abdullah ibn Jahsh, yeah.
I was going to say that I was listening to a lecture one time about this incident. The guy was saying that, in this case, if you think of the context, the Prophet was left in such a difficult position, and from a PR perspective, he doesn't know what to do because he has to command them, but he doesn't want to give this legitimacy information. It's testimony to how good of a judge Allah is in such a difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Whose lecture was it? Oh, I thought so. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. What? Of the Prophet. Yeah. I suppose. On lineage, I'm really bad. So you're asking the wrong person. Ubaidullah. Yeah. This is Abdullah. It's Ubaidullah. Ubaidullah, he was also a cousin. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this. They were brothers. Yeah. Uh, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Is that surprising or what? Oh. Mm. Yeah, because they're not interested in showing because there were many people related. I mean, Abu Lahab was related to the Prophet ﷺ. So like it doesn't really matter if they're related or they're not related. Like, does it make a difference if they're related or not? It just shows more animosity or more love or something like that. So in the context, it's the story is not focusing on that aspect of it. So it's not really a significant part. Even if you took it out of the notes, it wouldn't make a difference. But you seem to be very interested in this. Hmm. No, there's a lot. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so if the issue is the name itself, there are certain names which, for example, a guy's name is Kilab, for example, right? Yeah, exactly. So Kilab means dogs, right? So why would somebody name themselves after dog? It doesn't mean that they're named dog for themselves. It means that the person happened to have dogs with him and he used to be fond of dogs, so they named him Kilab. So it doesn't mean that that's the person. He's named after that for a different reason. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's common actually. It's not unusual. It still happens. Yeah. Okay. Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Last one for tonight. We have time. All right. So Mu'adh was a very important companion. He was from Medina, and he participated in the second pledge of Aqaba. So he accepted Islam before the Prophet had migrated to Medina. And he actually attended the second pledge of Aqaba in Mecca. After becoming Muslim, he used to frequent the company of the Prophet quite often. And remember, anyone who used to stick with the Prophet and always be close to him, they would actually learn more about Islam, because they would be around the Prophet's company a lot. So he became very knowledgeable about Islam. And the Prophet even made a statement later on. He said, the most knowledgeable of my ummah, of my community, in matters of halal and haram is Mu'adh ibn Jabal. So he knew very well about what is halal and haram, and he was specialized in this. All right, so when the Prophet attests to your knowledge, there's no disputing it, and there's no need for any other authority to recognize your status. Mu'adh was one of the people who memorized the entire Quran during the lifetime of the Prophet. So he was sought later on in terms of when it was being compiled and all of that. After the liberation of Mecca, the Prophet had Mu'adh ibn Jabal stay in Mecca in order to teach the people Islam. So we learn a number of things. Number one, that after people entered into Islam, they didn't just say, Assalamu alaikum, Allahu Akbar, and leave. They left a teacher there to teach them. Mu'adh was one of those people to show how much knowledge he actually had and how important it was for him to stay and teach the people about what Islam is and remain there. Later on, he moved to Yemen. And when the people of Yemen actually started accepting Islam, the Prophet actually decided to send Mu'adh ibn Jabal as a leader with some other companions to go and teach the people over there. So you find that he's one of the top people who keeps on being sent by the Prophet to teach everybody Islam. So he's like, he has the green light he has like ijaza. He has a license from the Prophet to go and teach other people. So when he was leaving for Yemen, the Prophet ﷺ was very interested in watching how Mu'adh leaves, and he wanted to give him some parting advice. So he asked him, this is a very, very famous hadith, and this relates to the subject of usul al-fiqh in a lot of ways. So he asked him, he said, you're going to the people of Yemen, how are you going to judge? How are you going to make judgments between them when you get asked questions? He said, I'm going to judge according to the book of Allah. I'm going to use the Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to test him. And he said, what if you don't find the answer in the Quran? Then he said, then I'm going to judge according to the Sunnah, according to what I've learned from you and I've heard you doing. And he says, and if you don't find the answer in my Sunnah, what are you going to do then? So that's a trick question, right? The trick question is, if it's not in the Quran, it's not in the Sunnah, what are you going to use? So he responded and he said, then I'm going to exert myself, meaning ajtahidu. It's called ijtihad, meaning I'm going to use my best judgment based upon what I know about Islam, what I've learned from the Quran and Sunnah, and I'm going to use my own judgment, but based upon what I've learned about Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was very pleased. He tapped him on the chest, which means like, good job. It's like giving a pat on the back. And he said, praise be to Allah who has guided the messenger of Allah to what pleases the messenger of Allah. It's a very famous statement. So he called him, out of lovingly, he called him Rasulu Rasulillah, the messenger of Allah. Right? So he says, so he was very happy with him. And then he reminded Mu'adh that you may not see me after this year. So make sure you be careful in what you do. And he gave him some parting advice. And Mu'adh actually never saw the Prophet ﷺ again, because this was near the end of the mission of the prophethood. Later on, when Umar was the Khalifa, he actually sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to go and collect and distribute the zakah among the people. So he was utilized by Umar. He used to teach a lot. There was many other incidents in his life that the book has unfortunately skipped. So someday we can go back and revisit it. But Umar sent him to go and collect zakah and distribute it. So when he came back and he did his job and everything was done, he came back empty-handed. He had nothing to show for it. So his wife asked, what did you bring back? Where are the gifts? He said, there's nothing, there's no gifts. She said, well, people in your position, they usually get a lot of gifts and all that because you're in a status of authority. You should have brought something. He said, I have nothing to give. She said, well, what's wrong with you? He said, there was a strict supervisor watching over me. That's his excuse. There was a strict supervisor watching over me. So she started complaining. She was not happy. And she started mentioning to her friends, this is so unfair. That, Mu'adh ibn Jabal was, the Prophet ﷺ, respected him and trusted him so much. And look at Umar. Umar doesn't even trust him. He goes and puts the supervisor to watch him, like guard him and watch everything that he's doing. And she was really upset at Umar. So eventually the word got around. And the word started going around and going around. It reached Umar. So Umar called him and said, come to my office. We need to have a talk. He said, I'm hearing these rumors. Did I set a supervisor over you? And he said, no, but I couldn't think of any other excuse to give her, right? So he wasn't lying. What did he actually mean that there's a supervisor watching me? Allah is watching me, right? But he said, I couldn't think of anything else to say. So Umar started laughing and he said, you know what? Here, I'm going to give you a gift from the treasury. Go ahead and hopefully this, makes your family happy. So it shows you Mu'adh was not interested in any of these things. The way in which he fulfilled his mission, he did not want any personal gain, as we see like from other people. Later on in history, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan was the governor of Syria, and he asked Umar for some teachers. Send some people to teach the people of Syria about Islam. So obviously, Umar remembered who would the Prophet ﷺ send to go and teach Islam. He picked the same companions. So one of the people he sent was Mu'adh ibn Jabal. And he sent two other people as well. So Mu'adh went to Hims. From Hims, he went to Palestine, went to Philistine. And he was teaching Islam, teaching in the Grand Mosque of Damascus prior to that and all of that. So later on, he became ill. And when he became ill and he was on his deathbed, he was prepared for death. So he said, welcome death. a visitor has come after a long absence. Meaning death is a visitor, it's been gone for a very long time, it's not been there, and now it's come after a long time, so it's welcome. Right? So what is it? What do you do with the visitor? You welcome them, right? So what he's trying to show is that, you know what, I'm not afraid of death, and I'm prepared for it, and when it's time to die, it's time to die. So he made a dua and he said, "Oh Lord, you know that I did not desire this world, and I did not desire to prolong my stay in this world." Right? So he's making this dua so for himself and to remind the people around him that do not fear death. When it comes, it comes. When it's time, and it's inevitable. So why should we try to run away from it? Why should we try to, be upset when it happens? So he makes a metaphor of death being a visitor that comes to you. And when a visitor comes, you welcome the visitor. You don't try to run away from it. You don't try to shun it. And this is Mu'adh ibn Jabal, one of the most knowledgeable companions, passed away during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. So, radiallahu anhum, may Allah be pleased with all these companions, and may He allow us to follow in their footsteps. Ameen.
So the last part of the statement is saying that Allah gave me a longer life, even though I didn't desire it, but Allah
No. When he made the dua?
Yeah.
No, what he's saying is that, "Oh Allah, I had no intention to stay longer in this life. So now that you're causing me to die, I'm ready for it. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm ready for it." That's what he was saying. Any other questions? No. The dua in Arabic, I can look it up for you if you really want it. Or you can look it up yourself. Okay, look it up in a book called Suwar min Hayat al-Sahaba by Abdurrahman Rafat Basha. Rafat Basha. Okay, last question is, I don't know because I didn't look it up. So quick CIS administrative question. So next quarter, how many of you registered for next quarter already? She said not to register? I doubt she would say that. For registration? Okay, so you're working on it. Who else is registering? So as you notice, there's no class on Thursday, right? No, next quarter. There's no Thursday class, right? So the question is, if we were to add a Thursday class of Islamic Law 101 or Tazkiyah, how many of you would enroll in the class and actually attend? 1, 2, 3. Huh? It's a previous one, the same one that's been offered before. You would do only Islamic Law 101? You would do either? Either one? Purification of the heart or Islamic Law? It would not be taught by me. Still trying to confirm, but it would be Sheikha Muslima Permo. She's not bad. Yeah, she does. Alhamdulillah. You might do it? You would do it? You can get 10 people? Guaranteed? Guaranteed? You can guarantee 15 people from your own side? I'm going to hold you to it then. No, but see, the thing is, that's hype, okay? Yeah, I know that. In the country, in the whole country, pretty much. Yeah, okay, inshallah. So the thing is, so if you can get me a list of people who are 100% confirmed, it's going to help motivate her to agree and be like, okay, I'm going to do this. Because she wants to, but she doesn't want to do it if people are not going to really attend, right? She's really busy. Next quarter, yeah. So send me a list, inshallah. All right. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nastaghfiruka Allah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With 5 minutes to spare. MashaAllah.